That was really frustrating because you needed so much effort to get stuff off the ground.
The pleasure of React, I think, is really that it nails that layer of having these UI components that's very easy to reason about.
You can simply build stuff again and it's fun. I struggled with this problem myself, rich text editing.
Browsers are really horrible.
In 3 years, rich text editing must be a no-brainer. That's what I want to see.
Hey, this is Brian, and you're listening to JAMstack Radio, a bi-weekly series where we discuss the JAMstack, a new way of building websites and apps that are fast, secure, and simple to work with. JAMstack Radio is brought to you by HeavyBit, a program dedicated to helping startups take their developer products to market. For more information, visit heavybit.com. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, or if you'd like to suggest a topic, find us on Twitter at JAMstack Radio. So welcome to another installment of JAMstack Radio, and here we have Matt Biilmann once again. Matt, welcome.
Hi again.
And then we have Nik Graf. Nik, hello.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Awesome. So we met in person, like IRL. Actually, we're in person today, so I don't have to preface that. But we met a couple weeks ago, just randomly. I was doing a serverless meetup or meeting with the serverless guys, and then I found out you worked there. And then they told me you maintain DraftJS Plugins, which got me really intrigued. So can you introduce yourself and then tell me a little bit about DraftJS Plugins?
Absolutely. So yeah, I'm Nik Graf. I do a lot of front-end stuff, but actually my background is full stack. So I maintained a lot of and built a lot of back-end stuff as well.
Yeah.
But especially over the last 2 to 3 years, I've doubled down on front-end. And yeah, about 1.5 years ago, I decided to check out React, and that actually got me kickstarted again, because by the time I was laying it low and doing more sales and freelancing.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
wow.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's like team management, and we had this. I'm part of this freelancer community called StarterSquad.
Okay.
And there, back then, I started to do more team management and like helping people and coordinating. But yeah, with React, it was a lot more fun again to do front end, because I could see I could build great components, encapsulate everything in there that was messy, and then give that to our team, and even I could reuse it, and it was amazing. Yeah.
Cool. So it sounds like React kind of revived your career.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Wow.
Absolutely. Back to UX and front end, and
well, that's interesting. And I think I told you off air that I listened to your interview with React 30, but I know, so Michael Jackson, who hosts that, he had a very similar experience where he was getting to the point where he was kind of done with programming at that point. He had worked for Twitter and some other startups after that. And he got to the point where it's just I'm not sure if I really want to do this anymore. And React basically also revived his career as well. So it's really interesting how React is not only is a different approach, but also gets people excited about doing front-end UX again.
Yeah, because simply, at least for me, I worked so hard to get good UX working, but it was so hard to do. And by the end, that was really frustrating, because you needed so much effort to get stuff off the ground. But nowadays it's way more easier, and it's really good for the whole ecosystem, as well as for me personally, and I guess also for Michael, because you can simply build stuff again and it's fun. Yeah,
and I think we're having the same thing. So with Matt, I work with Matt, and Matt built our entire app in Angular, and now we've converted it to React. And it's definitely an interesting approach. I think the approach of the UI of React makes it fun to actually throw components around and inject them and stuff like that. Matt, did you have similar experience with React when you switched over?
Yeah, I like a lot how isolated components are, mainly, right? I think that's what it really, really got right after lots of people have sort of been attempting it, and I've been attempting it myself. I built a big single-page app before any of the frameworks were around, right? And came up with somewhat similar architecture, but really messy.
Yeah.
And I gotta admit that the pleasure of React, I think, is really that it nails that layer of having these UI components that's very easy to reason about. Because I think anyone who's tried to build a large app without something like Redux and React in a single page way has run into problems of just figuring out how does a UI component come into some weird state where weird callbacks are not behaving in the right order and things like that. And I think React really brings a model that makes it easy to actually reason about what's going on in your code base.
Yeah. Let me do a shout out to Jeremy Ashkenas here, because I think we came a really long way, and like the first step for me happened with Backbone. I remember the day when I was still fiddling with jQuery code and like looking things up in the DOM based on attributes and then removing stuff, and in hindsight that's crazy. But yeah, and like the first time I saw Backbone and actually went through the code, and I don't know, there was like some 0.0 something. It was fascinating. Like, wow, you can actually build a framework for the front end to do single page applications. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. And it's so beautiful. But yeah, in hindsight, it's like, well, we could do even better. And there's React, and we're all in love with React. So I'm curious to see like what comes next.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of things in the works. I think like different other frameworks and plugins that are making things a little exciting, even more exciting. I know our CTO just today built something in Elm.
Yeah. It's going to be fun to look into.
Yeah, I just looked at the code and I was like, Elm. Okay, I'm interested. So let's rewind a little bit back to last year's ReactConf. They announced DraftJS.
Absolutely.
So what made you want to do DraftJS plugins after the announcement of DraftJS? Like, what was the exciting part about that?
So let me quickly explain what DraftJS is.
Oh yeah, please.
So DraftJS is a rich text editing framework based on an immutable model. And yeah, as you said, it was released by Facebook on the ReactConf earlier this year. And what I tried to do rich text editing a couple of times in the past, or just doing add mentions, all that kind of stuff. It's really, really hard because you only have text area. And then what happened in the past a lot is like you put stuff on top, divs, position them absolute, and it was all like big dirty hacks.
Yeah.
And that was super painful. And in the end, like building a good experience was hard. And the only team that I saw that like really executed on that well was Medium, because I mean I think they are still the gold standard of like how to do.
Yeah, I think a lot of people use them as a standard of what their CMS looks like.
But they're still sometimes buggy. It's like, so it's, yeah, I don't know. I find it really fascinating that like one of their core experiences is editing. And even though they fully focus on it, it's still hard to do and they still have trouble sometimes. So I struggled with this problem myself, rich text editing. And when I saw DraftJS coming out, I was like, holy moly, this is amazing. Because if they do all the hard work, abstracting all the browser differences away, and I just have to write React components and apply some strategies or build my own blocks with React, and that would be amazing. And so for me, this was absolutely the biggest announcement of the ReactConf earlier this year, and then I found it super exciting. And then by the time I got funded by Stripe, there's such a thing as the open source retreat. I was right at the time doing the open source retreat. So they paid me to work full-time only on my own open source projects. And that was a super nice opportunity because I felt like, okay, I just fiddled with this DraftJS thing for a week or two.
Yeah.
And yeah, it stuck with me.
Wow.
And DraftJS has brought in some really interesting ideas. First of all, this immutable model. And that was super interesting because you basically could intercept every change. And that made it really powerful because you have kind of when you use Redux, you have this global state.
Yeah.
And then whenever you dispatch an action, the state changes and based on a reducer. But in this case, you have an input form or like an input in React. You have this concept of like on change. Yeah. And then you have to pass it down via value again.
Yep.
In this case, it's just on change and then editor state. But the interesting thing is that like whenever you do a change, you get a complete new version of this model back. It's still efficient because it uses immutable JS, which under the hood uses stack trees and tries to reuse memory and all that kind of stuff. So that's pretty cool. And that is super powerful. So that's why I was super excited. And second of all, like you could take this model and you could actually generate a JSON structure out of it. And then you could put it on the server. And compared to doing rich text editing in the past, where most people just then took the HTML, and the tags or whatever the people created, and then dumped it into the database, I found this horrible because you have to sanitize it. You cannot, like doing operations on it is really, really hard because you transform the stuff on your database or what you see is like you get people drop in a special data into that, and then
like malicious,
it's weird,
script tags and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly.
And also just like when it comes to content editable, which is sort of the browser standard, all of those rich text editors are built upon. It's like that's almost a malicious piece of code in itself. Browsers are really horrible. Like just the fact that when you press enter in content editable. Like there's no consensus at all between any of the browsers of what actually happens. Like it's completely different from browser to browser if you insert a BR or a new paragraph or if you extend the current tag you're in. Like it's completely different, right? Yeah. And things like at a point, Chrome randomly started to insert style line height equals 1.5 on random elements. Like just from one day to another, they released a version of Chrome that decided to start doing that, right? So anything you had that used content editable suddenly began inserting line heights that might be completely different than the line heights of the rest of your document. And it's incredible how bad that API is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, so Facebook's DraftJS open source project basically
they fixed that.
They fixed it for us. Okay.
So they abstract. So every time you do a change, it's actually because it uses content editable, and every time you do a change in a content in HTML, it will map back to the data structure. And every time you change the data structure, it will map back to the content. And this is super useful because then you don't have to fiddle with HTML anymore. You just fiddle with the data structure on the user level or developer level. And that's convenient.
Huh? And before we jump into the plugins aspect of what you're doing, my question is, so am I correct that Facebook built this out of their messaging platform? Like they were using this already somewhere else?
So there's Isaac. And Isaac worked on this, as far as I understood, for the last 1.5 years, because Facebook exactly had this problem, like how do we do ad mentions? How do we do hashtags, all that kind of stuff? So they basically built this, and eventually they extracted DraftJS out of this building process of doing these things. And Isaac was the guy who did most of the work, as far as I understood. And that's how it happened.
So why plugins then?
Okay, yeah. And that's actually where it leads to plugins or a plugin system, because DraftJS was created out of this need for having that, for inputs like comments, status update, messaging. But the problem for me was that it is a monolithic system. So when you use DraftJS, you basically have to, everything you want, every feature, you have to put into this one component.
Yeah.
And that makes it really tricky, because if you have a custom block renderer and you have an image feature, and if you have a sticker feature, or if you have a YouTube feature and all these things, then you would need to, in one method, basically, write the same code for handling these different cases. And so I built a couple of things with DraftJS in the first week. And also I saw, like in the first 2 weeks, we saw a lot of like people starting to write, trying to match Medium Editor with DraftJS and building this huge code bases of 1,000 to 2,000 lines of code with all the features in one thing.
Yeah, I've noticed some of those, and also it's like looking at them, because on the one hand, we definitively wanted something similar also for Netlify CMS, right? Like the same. Like, I think the Medium experience in terms of like how the toolbar appears and how you add new block level elements is really good, right? But then every time I looked at those draft versions, it's like they try to take over everything, right? And even handle image uploads on the, like some of them even try to handle sort of the server side of that. And I think that's definitively a much more powerful approach to find a way to decouple those different things and have a solid extensible editor. Exactly, and that's where we started to, the idea came from, like, why not abstract it and build a wrapper around DraftJS, the editor component itself. So we had like, we've looked into either do it with higher order components or do it with a wrapper component. Okay. And in the end, the wrapper component was a little bit more straightforward and has some advantages that you can do ref, and you can use this ref to, for example, set focus, and then you can expose the same thing as the editor has to the wrapper as well, and you basically pipe it through. So there's a couple of benefits using the wrapper.
yeah, then we decided to go with the wrapper and basically build the system which automatically maps the DraftJS properties that you can use to do custom things like custom blocks or so, to use this and like basically go through all the plugins and take every method and then combine them and run through them. And that's how a plugin architecture was born.
Yeah, so the architecture itself, so if I install DraftJS on my React component or whatever, and I have DraftJS there, I want to add DraftJS plugins, am I installing separate plugins each time I want a separate plugin, or install the entire architecture like...
No, so what you need is you cannot use the DraftJS editor by a component. I mean, you can use all the features from DraftJS itself.
Yeah.
But there's this one wrapper component, which is basically the plugin editor.
Okay.
And this is just a wrapper around the original editor. And then you get that allows you to pass in plugins as a property.
Okay.
And the plugins you install separately. So it's like separate repos, because that was the whole idea. So like some people want to have a mention feature. Some people want to have a mention feature and an image feature. Some people only want to have the image feature.
Yeah.
And that's...
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're seeing some of the same sort of challenges in terms of the CMS, where we also want the main... So the CMS is based on the idea that you have different fields, like each content type have a list of fields, and each field has an associated widget, right? So it could be like just a string widget or an image widget or a relations widget or a markdown widget, right? And obviously for the markdown widget is where we used where we needed a rich text editor that we felt was solid enough to both be able to switch between a markdown mode and a rich text mode. And that would not, we definitively didn't want something that worked directly with some DOM HTML representation, also because I've been there before and I know how painful it is. And
so you have actually a lot of experience in rich text editing too. And I don't think
I've pretty much tried all of them, I think, in real products.
It's for the listeners. I don't think we actually explained. Netlify is actually making a CMS to build on top of our...
I should explain a little. Netlify is, in itself, Netlify is like an automation platform for JAMstack sites, right? Where you just connect a GitHub repository to Netlify, and every time you push to Git, we'll run whatever build tool you're using, run the build, and do an atomic deploy to our content delivery network of the result. And that's one of the big use cases here, is just all the sites built around static site generators and so on. And those are amazing for developers, right? Like way nicer to work with something like Hugo than something like WordPress. It's much nicer to have everything in a Git repository instead of having most of the most important stuff in some database somewhere. But the challenge for a lot of people is what do we do with the non-technical users? What do we do with the marketing department that needs to be able to go and update the site every day, and that definitively won't be firing up Atom and editing Markdown through GitHub, right? It's not going to happen. So one of the ways we're tackling that is by building an open source CMS, Netlify CMS, that's not directly, it's not tied to Netlify in any way. It's just tied to the idea of all your content living as structured data in a Git repository.
Cool.
And then being able to give non-technical editors an intuitive interface for going in, like creating a new post or updating an author or whatever you want to change, and give them a side-by-side preview, a little Ghost or something like that, where you have the fields for the content you need to fill out on the one side, and then a preview of how will this content more or less look like once you hit publish and it goes live. And then when you hit publish, we actually keep track of content in each publish can go into sort of a branch that then gets some associated metadata with comments and so on, so you can actually have an editorial workflow that's similar to what developers do with pull requests, but just for really non-technical people, right? And once you finally say, publish this, it creates a commit in GitHub, and that triggers a build with whatever system you're using for that, and a new version of the site goes live. And there, of course, we needed to fit in the actual editing component for Markdown, which is one of the most important parts. And I've built 2 commercial CMSs before, so I've dealt with this a lot, and I've tried, I have a lot of experience with the old generation of rich text editors, like Tiny, MCE, and CK Editor, and that whole batch of content editable based editors that are all pretty horrible in many ways. And it's been really interesting to see sort of a whole new generation of rich text editors come out recently. Like DraftJS is one of them. Marjin Harvebek that made Code Mirror is working on another one called Prose Mirror, and then 37 Signals has one that I can't remember the name of that one off the bat of my head. And then Slate is out as well, where all of them has in common that they finally put an abstraction layer between the DOM and the editor and have this internal structured representation of the document you're editing, instead of just having essentially the DOM being that representation, which creates so many problems otherwise. We eventually looked a lot at both DraftJS and Slate, and haven't it's not a very easy decision.
I love Slate, by the way.
And I think what drove us to Slate and eventually was that it seems like its internal representation of the document is more flexible than DraftJS presentation.
I can give you a little bit I know a little bit about the background story on Slate.
Yeah, so, what's the difference between that and DraftJS?
Okay. So Ian Storm Taylor is the creator of Slate, and he was there very early on when DraftJS was released. And there's this Slack channel where a lot of people, I think about 800-900, hang out and constantly ask questions and post answers. And he was there very early on. And he started to build a couple of things with DraftJS as well. And what happened is, like, when I built like the initial version of the DraftJS plugin system, he actually gave a lot of feedback. And I would say a lot of the like good decisions in DraftJS plugins are because he provided feedback. Yeah. And that was super helpful. Eventually, and that was a very interesting move, I think DraftJS was not moving fast enough, and they had like, DraftJS is like, I think they deal with it like every other Facebook project. They focus on the use case they have. Yeah. And then they know how to maintain that, and they know how to work with that. And that's their core focus. I think it's changing a little bit now with React. They also do server-side rendering and so, although they don't do it by themselves. Yeah. But still, that was still the case with DraftJS. And I think what for Ian, that was not like fast enough. And actually, I have to say, I don't know what his personal ambition was, but like he created Slate. And I think it's very much inspired by after DraftJS came out, but he also took the model from other systems. And yeah, the core system also looks very, very similar to like what DraftJS Plugins does. Okay. And he even says on the website, it's like inspired by DraftJS and DraftJS Plugins and Prose Mirror and Quill and all these systems. And I think I haven't done much with it yet, but the API to me looks more like approachable. Yeah. And on the other hand, to be fair, for the people who built DraftJS, I think he has a good position to start, because he saw the final thing. He worked with DraftJS for a couple months and then figured out like, okay, then you have all the lessons learned, and then if you have the motivation and ambition to start something, you basically can build a whole new thing with... Yeah,
you start from way up here instead of down where DraftJS had to start.
Absolutely, yeah. So I think without DraftJS, Slate would not be a thing. Yeah. But still, it's like, it's amazing. I think and maybe you can tell more, I heard it's not fully fleshed out and a bit buggy in some cases, but I think that's just a matter of time.
I think so too. I mean, it's obviously not a rich text editor that's been out in the wild for super long and been battle tested by all the weird edge cases and so on, right? And we definitively also find that we're putting in a lot of work to really make our editor component on top of it, right? It's not like you just plug it in and then it's done, right? But but I also think it's, as you say, right? It's like, obviously it's taking some really good architectural decisions and fundamental decisions, and it's an active project. And I think there's a lot of people seeing that this is like, I think Gitbook is using it as well now, or working on it, right? Okay, and I think there'll be quite a bit of uptake around it, and I also think it's on a good track.
So with DraftJS plugins, I was going to ask, can you integrate that into Slate if it's built similarly?
The API is way too different.
Way too different, okay.
I'm thinking about, like, actually with a friend in Europe, I'm doing like every couple of weeks pair programming sessions. So we probably build a mentioned plugin for Slate.
Yeah, because you could probably pour all the same plugins.
Yeah, the benefit is that I have the experience with all the plugins, and the edge cases and so on. Yeah. So that's where, like, it's clearly a benefit, but on the other hand, it's still work, and it's just a matter of like time.
Yeah.
If I could clone myself, like I would dedicate one Nik to build out Slate plugins, but that's
Well, it'd be interesting to see because, like you said, Matt, there's like more CMSs or just rich text editors that are coming out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it'd be interesting to see if they take a Redux approach where they absorb, like Facebook will absorb some of the technology from Slate, and maybe things can be in parity eventually. So I don't know. I'm not sure how.
What do you mean?
So. What, a year and a half ago, we had so many different Flux implementations.
Oh, like this.
And I know we don't have tons of DraftJS implementations at this moment. I'm not even sure. I'm actually curious, are there a lot of people using DraftJS like in production in their code as well?
I mean, the most significant number is probably the people on Slack.
Okay.
There's like, a couple hundreds of them. I think I could even look it up, but I think it's about 7, 8, 9, maybe even 900 people just being in that chat room.
Yeah.
I know enough teams all over around the globe, small, medium-sized companies using DraftJS, and it even goes to the point where I feel like uncomfortable about like architectural decisions. So for example, there's one guy who tweeted, I don't know, it was a month or two ago, they were on an Angular code base, but they decided to pull in these dependencies, React, Immutable.js, DraftJS, just to get the mention plugin. Because they looked at like a lot of other stuff in the Angular space, in React space, and so on. And they said like, that's the only thing that really does what we want. And it's really a pity, but we want to have the feature and we have to move on. And eventually we might migrate to React. It's not happening right now, but we need that feature and we need that right now. And nobody else is providing it in this quality. And then, it makes me feel uncomfortable. Why is this the only way to go? But on the other hand, I'm obviously proud that they're like so confident in this plugin.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm super impressed with your work, and I'm super impressed with like what DraftJS is and even Slate. I'm very interested in jumping in there.
I hope there's some cross-pollination happening now. Like that I don't know if it will eventually merge. I think with 2 players out there only and they're way too different. Yeah. But I hope that basically the ideas that a lot more ideas are currently coming from Slate, and I hope that they come back to DraftJS again, and then again that like this also brings ideas back to Slate, and that is like I want to see a better ecosystem. I don't care who wins. I just want to see like in 3 years, rich text editing must be a no-brainer. That's what I want to see.
I really hope so too. Right? It's been so long, and it's like such a fundamental part of any system that has user input, right? And it's so painful.
Absolutely,
well, hopefully people who listen to this podcast will get excited about it. And so DraftJS Plugins, it's open sourced.
Absolutely.
I think it's open source, github.com/DraftJS Plugins/DraftJS Plugins. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Okay, cool.
Always with draft-js-plugins.
Okay, cool.
You can find it.
Awesome. Yeah, I hope people jump on board and get excited about that. And then Netlify CMS, same thing, open sourced as well.
Yeah, totally open source.
Where can I check it out?
GitHub, Netlify/Netlify-CMS.
Awesome. And you have a demo up there as well?
We're working right now, I think, in the transition from Ember to React. The link to the demo is gone, but it'll be up there like probably next week. But the whole code base is there, and I think like one of the interesting thing is that it uses this concept of backend, where GitHub's API is one of the backends. We have another little service called Netlify Git API that you can run from a local Git repository, and it will sort of give you GitHub's API for your local repository so that you can use for another backend. But then we also have a little just in-memory backend that's just like a fake repository in memory. So you can use that for the demo, and when developing, just seeing like how do I make a widget that just works on this without actually having to go round trips to GitHub and so on.
Yeah, I think one lesson that I learned for building open source project is like you need to have a really good demo.
Yeah.
So people must be able to try it out. Or if it's backend stuff, then at least like show exactly what it does and how you can help people
with GIFs.
It's in the end. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, GIFs help a lot because the time span people are gonna look at stuff is very brief, and you basically have to market this as a product.
Yeah.
If you want your open source project to be successful, or let's see, successful is maybe the wrong term. It's like being more widespread, which helps you because you get more feedback and more contributions. Then like you have to market it as a product.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like we've sort of been developing it like in the open, but fairly quiet until now. And then we have like a pretty big project that's going to be using the CMS that I think will go live like end of this month or start of next month or so on, right? So around that time, we'll also start like pushing out more of the documentation and demos and examples and so on around it.
Yeah. Keeping documentation up to date is hard.
Yeah.
Wow.
There's
really
so many tools out there. Well, cool. So in this conversation, we didn't get to mention it too, but I wanted to mention you're at Serverless.
Yeah.
And Serverless does a really good job with their GIFs too, like making me understand exactly what I need to do and what sort of output I'm looking for to see. So thumbs up to Serverless as well.
Yeah, Austin. Nowadays, still Austin, our CEO, does most of the GIFs.
Oh yeah.
Well, he's really good at that.
Got a good GIF game.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think he's proud of that, and that's fair enough because he does a good job there. Yeah.
Cool. So I want to transition to the picks. So anything you guys are jamming with, anything that gets you going. So you do a lot of open source, anything that gets you excited about it. Feel free to share. Nik, if you have something ready to go as the guest, I'll let you go first.
One thing I do at Serverless is I get the opportunity to play with GraphQL. So we do a couple of experiments building out a future platform. And we decided to use GraphQL there. And I love it. And it's so good. And that's also kind of an announcement because yesterday we started to Serverless we going to release a 1.0 very soon that changed a couple of things, and we upgraded the serverless GraphQL kind of starter kit or boilerplate to this version 1 and like added Relay and Apollo so you can choose between these two clients. And basically finished it up yesterday and released it. Probably do a marketing push or so in 2 weeks. But I'm super excited about this because what you can do is you can take this thing. It takes like a couple minutes to set up the initial project, and you have it ready. You can deploy it and it's production ready because it runs on AWS Lambda, which theoretically scales indefinitely. And then you could simply, for the resolvers, wrap your REST API.
Yeah.
And that's super powerful because then as a front-end team, you just basically put GraphQL in front of your REST API and then have all the power of GraphQL, you don't need to overfetch, you don't need to underfetch, you just fetch whatever you need. Yeah. And it's production ready because AWS Lambda and scales amazingly. And I'm super excited about this. And in general, do more with GraphQL. Really enjoy this concept of just fetch what you need. And
awesome.
I love it.
Yeah, I'm going to check it out.
Yeah. That sounds really exciting.
Yeah.
I'm also interested to see, for our CMS now that GitHub launched a GraphQL-based API for all of GitHub, which is we still haven't quite figured out how well does it fit with what we're doing, but that's really interesting as well. So there's a lot of interesting things going on around GraphQL.
Yeah, it's totally exciting. And the second thing is probably getting more into functional programming. So I once in 2 weeks, I do a couple of hours pair programming with Stephen Noble from Stripe and Teresa from Denmark. And we just do, the last couple of weeks, we fiddled a little bit with, or the last couple of months, actually, we fiddled with Elm, and now we have a pretty good understanding.
Okay.
Actually, Teresa works with Elm full-time nowadays. Yeah, I think the company is called Upbeat, or I'm not sure.
Yeah,
I wasn't aware anybody else was using it.
Upbeat is a Danish company, so that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly.
Matt's Danish, by the way. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm Danish
too. All right, the circle closes. Yeah. So Elm is... React has a lot of these functional approaches and Cyclic.js and RxJS, but in a language like Elm or Reason, you cannot bail out. And right now it's more of to me personally, it's like an interesting challenge or like shift my thinking paradigms. But yeah, I can definitely see this being the future, that we either work with Reason or with Elm in the future. That could be maybe the next thing after React, if it gets traction. Would be interesting to see. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't mind, Matt, I was going to segue because I was going to pick the Elm community as one of my picks. Recently, they made a blog post about their meetups. I don't know if you were able to go to any of the meetups since you've been here.
Yeah, I've been there a couple of times.
Yeah, so they wrote a blog post of how they basically are trying to build a community differently. So rather than doing a talk at their meetups, they actually do hack nights.
Yeah.
So that you can actually just learn Elm and get your questions answered from like Evan, who's the creative Elm and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I just want to shout out to them. I'm also excited about Elm as well. I've done one tutorial so far. I would really like to also get into the community as well. Functional programming, since React is like the entry door to functional programming. Like I didn't know it was like a thing I needed to know, and now it's a thing I need to know. So that was my first pick. And my second pick is actually off the beaten path of what we've been talking about so far. But some people know most of my picks are around Kanye West. I'm not going to pick him today. My pick today is Chance the Rapper, though. He's actually on tour with Kanye West at the moment. Awesome. And he's 23-year-old, just turned 23. He has his first CD just came out in the last few months, and the guy's phenomenal. He's also it's a different take on rap. So I think his approach is going to change. I think it's going to change the industry as far as like what's the next thing after, last 10 years of rap. So I think we're going to see more and more people who are going to start rapping like Chance the Rapper, which is a very generic name, but yeah. Matt, do you have any picks?
Well, mine would also be mine would be David, our CTO's little new project in Elm, a little open source project to be able to test Netlify's redirect and rewrite rules and header rules and so on in the browser, and put in the input format and make sure they behave right and so on. But I'm looking forward to play around with that, especially since I've done quite a bit of work in Haskell, and I actually still have 4 production services running in Haskell as part of a Webpop, my old product. And Elm is really like Haskell in the browser without the laziness, kind of. So I'm looking into playing around with that.
How is it the laziness can get you in some really weird cases with Haskell? Or?
It's both one of the big strengths of Haskell and one of the big challenges. It means that you can do things in a very declarative way sometimes, where you just define an infinite list of stuff and then take a part of it and apply operations. And since it's all lazy, it doesn't matter that it's an infinite list, because only the part that you actually touch gets evaluated, right? So there's a lot of things that you can do also in terms of thinking as operations, just of streams on lazy lists and things like that. The thing is that sometimes it can be normally the great advantage of Haskell is that it's very easy to reason about state and so on. But laziness can sometimes be a little harder to reason about, because you sort of lose touch of when does something get evaluated. And some of the common performance issues that people run into in Haskell can be when they deal wrong with laziness. So they end up passing along a lot of internally Haskell stores everything as funcs that are placeholder for something that needs to be evaluated, and you end up generating a lot of those instead of actually generating values that gets passed around and so on, and you can get interesting space leaks and stuff like that. So it can be a little tricky, but it can also be really powerful.
The Elm compiler, by the way, is written in Haskell.
Yeah. And the inspiration in the whole syntax and everything is very obvious. When you look at Elm, it feels very familiar coming from Haskell.
Wow. Well, I'm going to conclude this Haskell podcast. Well, Nik, I just want to thank you again for coming on the podcast and share about DraftJS Plugins and what you've done and how you got here, and also the little tidbit you gave us with the GraphQL and serverless. Hopefully people will listen to this and jump on that.
Yeah, I'm excited about this.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, man.
Thanks for having me.
That's all the time we have for today. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, or if you'd like to suggest a topic, find us on Twitter at JAMstack Radio. To learn more about Heavybit, visit heavybit.com. And while you're there, check out their library. It's packed with amazing talks on sales, marketing, product, and general management from founders of developer tools companies and other industry leaders.